Welcome, welcome back. Welcome to the Picky Girl Travels podcast, the show for Black women who want more out of life and to live it as they see fit. The message here is all about defying convention, embracing adventure, and regretting absolutely nothing. I'm your host, Adelia Aborshade of PickyGirlTravelsTheWorld.com. My guest today, Lisa James, is also known as the Adventurous Midlifer. So I think it's already apparent why I invited her on. She is a Gen X budget travel pro and also a digital nomad. I think those of you looking to live a life centered on travel are going to really enjoy this episode. The tagline of this show is defy convention, embrace adventure, and regret absolutely nothing. From the very beginning, started this podcast when I used to live in China, and I wanted to bring on Black women who exemplified that. And when I came across you during the very first Exodus Summit, in 2020, I was like, I need to talk to her because, being an adventurous midlifer myself, I want to have more conversations with women over 40 who are choosing to live their lives the way they want, which doesn't always fit into, what society says we're supposed to be doing at this age. So my first question is, were you always this fearless traveler and adventurer that I see on Instagram?
Not always. I wasn't exposed to like international travel growing up. Like I grew up on the projects of the Lower East Side. My mom raised 5 kids in the projects. So we weren't exposed to any extended travel other than everybody getting in the car going down south for the family reunion kind of situation. And it wasn't until I think my mom married her third husband, honey. And she married an Egyptian. And she began to travel to Egypt. And I think my first trip around that same decade was going to Cancun, Mexico. That was my very first international trip or experience with international. This was pre-passport needed. This was back in the days when all you had to do was show your driver's license or your birth certificate. And Cancun was, right. Cancun was, that was my first foray into international travel. So I think I was in my mid-20s then. So, yep.
Okay. So, now, because Mexico was the first place I'd gone, I hadn't grown up with international travel. Now, travel because my mother was from New Orleans. And so we would go back to visit, but my mother would visit like first flight in, last flight out. So, so like flying, that was always a thing for me, but like the thought of international travel, like I didn't know how that worked. I didn't know anybody who traveled like that. So my experience is sort of similar to yours. First place I went internationally was Mexico. I didn't even get to go to Cancun. We drove to Brownsville and walked across the border to Matamoros.
Wow.
Again, birth certificate in hand. So that's okay. So your life has kind of, I'm not even going to say made a 180. It's like beyond that. I think, because do you think the life that you lead now, the traveler you are now, could you have imagined that back when you took that first trip to Cancun?
No, because it was the typical, we gonna go stay in an all-inclusive resort. So I didn't really experience Mexico. It was like with a group of people from my ex-husband's workplace. It was that kind of trip. So it was an all-inclusive resort. You did everything together, all the tourist stuff. So yes, so we were at the all-inclusive resort, so we didn't even really experience Mexico. We didn't even eat Mexican food. It was, that completely packaged tourist. You're just going to Mexico, and you said you went to Cancun. So that really wasn't the catalyst for the type of travel that I do now. It definitely was not, because it was like Cancun, and this was maybe 1988.
Oh, wow.
And I, I didn't travel again until 92. And I went to Mexico again with some friends, but I got to see real Mexico. I went to Mexico City. And I think that that was my first taste of, wow, this is so different from the US. This is kind of dope. At the time, nobody was really traveling. Not in my circle. They weren't traveling internationally, and Mexico was so close. I think that was when I dipped my toe in. I think that was the point wherein I dipped my toe in, and it piqued my interest.
Okay, so I'm going to veer off from what my original question was because I live in Mexico City. So I am very
Okay.
curious, what was Mexico City like in the 90s? Because I know it was different than it is now, but I can't even imagine.
So it was more, it was raw. It was raw. It wasn't um it was, I just remember it being raw. I remember a lot more indigenous in Mexico City, because I've been back to Mexico City several times after that. A lot more indigenous. Just seemed like it was the capital was in transition. It wasn't the built up beauty that it is now, and it was in transition. And you saw a lot of people coming from the mountains that were, you walked around and you saw a whole lot of indigenous. It was rough and rugged. That's the best way that I can describe it. It wasn't built up for tourism the way it is now outside of the resort towns. Mexico City, most people didn't veer to Mexico City. They kind of stayed in that pipeline of, Playa del Carmen, Cancun, those areas. And so Mexico City was a little rough. People were kind of like, what are you going to Mexico City? What, are you crazy? So I think I got off on that. I kind of enjoyed that. I kind of enjoyed that kind of being a rebel, kind of roughing it, just kind of going with the flow, no plan, no itinerary. And that's when I think the bug bit me one more
Okay.
time.
Okay. So you had that trip to Cancun, which was the kind of typical vacation an American takes when they visit Mexico. You multiple years later, because I'm not good at doing math in my head, um, you visited Mexico City, which people get overwhelmed with it now. And I
Right.
find it is a very easy place to navigate, especially if you are comfortable with mass transit. So
Right.
I can only imagine what it was like in the early 90s. Um, but I know that you also traveled with your kids. Now, was that after when you took the kids to Guatemala? Was that after this Mexico City trip?
Yes, that was in 99. It was still the 90s. It was still no cell phones. It was still beeper culture. It was still, you got yourself a Let's Go or Lonely Planet guidebook, and that was your only foray into trying to figure out what you were going to do. There were tour companies that catered to, upper middle class people that did that kind of international travel. And so you had those package deals, but it was cost prohibitive for me. And so Guatemala made me figure stuff out, like all you had was your guidebook. There was no calling ahead to say, do you have a room? Right? There was none of that. You
You
just
just
went
show up.
with, you would Some of them had fax machines, right? And you can fax your request, and they would fax the confirmation back, but it was very few of them had fax machines. The more established hotels had fax machines that you can fax in your request, but we were backpacking, so we were hosteling it, we were homestaying it, and so no, you showed up, you knocked on the door and said, "Hey, do you have room for 3?"
Okay, so I wanna take some time right here because I think there might be a woman listening to this and she wants to travel more. Like that's the thing that she wants to do. When she envisions living her life on her terms, travel is involved. But her first thought is, I don't have a lot of money. Her second thought might be, but I have kids. And so I want to dig into this a little bit because you said, there were tours, but they were out of reach for you financially.
Right. Right. They were just. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you weren't in a position where you could pay, a full, the full cost of a tour for 3 people because you have 2 kids, correct?
Twins, yes. Mm-hmm.
Twins. Okay. So, but you still took them to Guatemala in 99. You said y'all were backpacking. Now let's talk about that because some of us of a certain age, you think backpacking, you think young, white, hippy dippy, crunchy granola types. Okay. So one, we don't see a lot of folks who look like us that do that, let alone doing it with kids. So can you talk about what that experience was on that trip to Guatemala?
So it was a question of, were we going to take this trip or not take the trip? And I went with my girlfriend, Monica, and her daughter, who was like 2 years older than my kids. So they were still young. They were like, I think my kids were 99, 94. They were 6. So I think Jasmine was 7 going on 8. We knew we wanted to take the trip, and we just did a little research to figure out how we can do it within our very, very, very poor budget. And we got our Lonely Planet. I mean, it was Let's Go and Lonely Planet were the Bibles of travel. I mean, Lonely Planet, even though now with the internet and stuff like that, they're not as prominent.
Let me stop you because there may be some younger folks here who are thinking when you said we did some research, they're thinking you did some Googles in 99, because I was teaching geography then. And when I had my kids, we planned a European vacation. There were a total of 3 computers in the library. Okay. And the students in my class, we were pulling out the Lonely Planets and the Foamers and all of those books. So I just want, in case there is anybody who is like on the younger end listening to this, when she says she did her research, there was nothing to Google. At this point, hotels did not really have websites. We weren't using the internet in that way. So I want to make sure y'all understand the gravity of this adventure that she took on with elementary age children.
Right. So there wasn't any internet. There wasn't any smartphones. We didn't even have, at the time, I had a beeper. I don't even think, no, I did. I had a flip phone. It was a flip phone and we had a beeper. But the beeper didn't work internationally, which we didn't find out till we got there. The beeper didn't work internationally. So we had a flip phone, but it really didn't work where we were going. It just didn't work. It's not like
there were no international plans back then.
Right. There was no SIM card for you to stick in an international SIM card. It was a flip phone that worked in New York at the time, but did not work once you got off that plane in Guatemala. You didn't get that little sign saying, "Welcome to Guatemala. Your T-Mobile is 5 gigabytes for the next, 30 days," right? There was none of that. So once you got in that country, it was just you, and a payphone. So if something popped off, I would have to find a payphone, make an international collect call, right? Because you didn't have enough change to put in the phone to make an international call. So I had to make an international call, it was going to be a collect call. I don't even know if they do collect calls now. So for a younger person listening, yes. And so collect calls, you didn't have to have the money to make that call. The operator would put you through. The person on the other end would have to accept the collect call, and then it would end up on their phone bill, right? And so once we got in Guatemala, the only thing that we had was our directions to get from point A to point B. So what we did was we made sure that our first destination was taken care of. Right. So you had phone numbers back then that you can call. You'd have to go and buy a phone card from the local bodega in order to call Guatemala, right? Because there was no such thing as an international plan. So you'd buy your phone card, and then you would call Guatemala. And we always made sure that our first stop was taken care of. We had somebody that was going to pick us up, and we had our first location that we were going to be in. So if for any reason something was to happen, most of the time we would just be standing around. So it's not like it is now. You can pick up the phone and say, where you at, girl? You're supposed to be here 10 minutes ago. You would just have to be patient and sit there. And when the guy got there, the guy got there. So if you're waiting 45 minutes, it wasn't the anxiety inducing waiting 45 minutes as it is now, right? We had to wait. Just like if you were going to meet your friends at the movies when we didn't have cell phones, you were just patient and you waited. So that's how we would navigate going into another country. That guidebook had everything, lodging, and it broke it down in cost tiers. So you had 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, as far as cost. And so we just looked for places that was the cheapest, and most of them were hostels.
Okay. So you with 6-year-old twins are staying in hostels. There are people who would balk at doing that in 2023. You don't speak Spanish, correct? Or at this time, did you speak Spanish?
She spoke Spanish. She speaks Spanish. Correct.
Oh, your friend did?
You there? Yes,
Can you
she
hear
spoke
me?
Spanish. Yes.
Okay, so
Yes, I
your
can hear
friend
you.
spoke some Spanish. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Well, because again, if in 1999 there was no Google Translate.
No, there
So
wasn't any Google. And the Spanish didn't help us. The Spanish didn't help us once we got out of Guatemala City and Antigua, because the where we stayed, the main area we stayed in was called Shela, Chenango, and the language there was Quechua or Tutsinil, and so it was an indigenous language, and so her speaking Spanish didn't help us once we got into the meat of Guatemala. So no Google Translate, like you said, only had the guidebook. And yes, hostels, I would say hostels then were all one thing. They were these places where they had a bunch of bunk beds, where multiple people slept in one room in bunk beds. That's what hostels were then. Hostels today are completely different. It's completely different. But hostels then, yes, it was usually a large room, and you had multiple bunk beds, and that's where you slept. And that's what we could afford. We couldn't afford hotels with the kids and ourselves because, they charge you by the body. There was no such thing as kids sleep free, even though that you can sleep in the same bed with 2 6-year-olds, it was no big deal. But that's not the way that they did it. So we stayed in hostels. And I think back then we were paying something like $2-3 a night.
that sounds about right. And you said y'all did homestays as well?
So we would stay, if we got invited to people's places a lot. So there's homestays wherein people think of homestays as like this creepy thing. No, back then, even we stayed at a homestay where the woman and her family lived in one area, and then she had rooms that she rented out. So, and they would cook breakfast for us, and it felt more like a family because they would sit down and, want to talk to us. The kids would play with their kids. And so I like homestays. I would take a homestay over a hostel or a hotel any day.
Okay. And so, um, you, and here's the other thing, that trip wasn't entirely planned out, was it?
Well, yeah, well, I still to this day in 2023, I don't plan in the typical way that people say they'll plan, that, if I'm going here for 2 weeks, they have every step mapped out. Like I'm in India right now in Surat. I came for a wedding. The wedding ended on Monday. My plan was to leave for Mumbai on Tuesday last week. And I'm still here today and didn't make it to Mumbai yet. Like it just didn't happen. There was no pressure. I just stayed. And so yeah, I don't do very good with
Well,
I don't do
no,
very
it's
well with
not a
planning.
criticism. It is, I want, I
Oh, no,
want
I
to
know.
make it clear that here, you don't have to figure it all out. If it's something that you want to do, you can figure it out as you go. Like, I think there are folks who feel like, oh, well, if I'm going to travel internationally with my children, I have to have everything covered. I have to figure everything out. I mean, I don't think travel is that much different than living our lives the way we do, because that's another the way we do on a day-to-day basis. Because another question I get a lot, because I have a Facebook group for Black women solo travelers, is like, if I'm going to travel alone, I've got to, do all of these things. And it's like, or I can't travel alone because of safety. And it's like, but how are you living your everyday life? Are you taking people with you to the grocery store when you go to pick up the dry cleaning? You're doing that by yourself. So if you're not figuring out every minute, every moment of your children's week in y'all's day to day life, and you can make it work, I think you can make it work when you travel as well.
I think so too. I think that there is a certain level of comfort with knowing that, you know, you what we want to do as parents is, we want to make sure our kids are comfortable and our kids are safe. And so when you kind of go by the seat of your pants, you can't always guarantee comfort, right? And so I think that there's that issue. I think that there's a level of comfort of knowing that this is what's in front of me. Most people don't deal with the uncertainty well, uncertainty in anything, right? So now if you take into consideration that person is outside of their comfort zone in another country, don't have a support system there, may not speak the language, I get why people may not want to travel in that way. This is not for everybody. And I have to say that I had a time frame. So this wasn't a 5-day vacation. If it was a 5-day vacation, then there would have had to have been a little more planning in order to get some stuff done. But this wasn't a 5-day thing. I had no time frame. I was a stay-at-home mom, and we set out with the goal of, okay, well, maybe we'll take 2 weeks, and we ended up staying a month. So I had the flexibility of doing that. So that uncertainty was built into the fact that I had weeks to do it. I think that if I only had a week, I think there would have had to have been some certainty. There would have had to have been some planning. So in all fairness, that would be a tough one if I was only there for a week. I don't
Yeah.
think I would have done
Okay.
it that way.
Okay. Now, um, I listened to another podcast interview that you did, and you talked about like that experience sort of changed how you traveled and how you traveled with your kids, and changed a lot of things about your life. And I feel, and this is me, the outside observer, feeling like that's where the adventurous midlifer I know today kind of was born, right? Um,
Right.
and y'all went on subsequent travel adventures, much in the same style, correct? All right. So
Correct.
the folks around you back home, what did they make of this? Because what you described that took place in 1999, only now in 2023 might that not like set people back and be like, what?
Right.
So, I'm I'm trying to imagine what your mom thought, what your family, your friends thought about you traveling like that, you travel or you traveling with the kids internationally. Because again,
Right.
I think my background's a little similar to yours. That's not something the people around me were doing.
No, and especially Guatemala. I mean, until I looked it up on the map, I had no idea where Guatemala was because it wasn't a country that was readily spoke about. Although they had a civil war that had ended in 96. You may see the headlines, but you just don't make the connection because it doesn't have you don't have a direct interest in it. And so although I might have possibly seen in the newspaper Guatemala, I didn't even recall. I wasn't even sure where Guatemala is. So clearly, folks weren't happy. My mom was a little more, she was a little more open to the idea, right? Because she had married an Egyptian and the idea of traveling, she had begun that. All my friends still think I'm batshit crazy. Some of the places I say I'm going and how I'm traveling and where I'm staying, and they still think I'm crazy in 2023. So there was that idea of she done lost her mind, right? What is she doing, with the kids? But it just became like this, I don't know, like, I won't say an addiction, but it just became something that just gnawed at my soul. Like I felt lost when I didn't travel, or I was pining for the next adventure. It just seeped into me in a way that I can't even describe. And that was the catalyst for my constant travel. And the way I travel was because that was what I could afford. So it was the choice of either I travel and do it as dirt cheap as possible because that's what I can afford, or I don't travel. And not traveling wasn't an option. So I found creative ways to do it cheaply, and that's what I did. And that's what I still kind of do because I ain't got no money.
No, and I in one of the earlier episodes of the podcast, when I talk about, for me, living life on my terms meant that travel had to be a major part of that. Like it had to be. And I was a public school teacher for 23, 24 years. I didn't make any money. I didn't make
Right.
any money at all. It's I didn't know how much money I wasn't making, but
Right.
I have no money. So for me, it was exactly what you said. Either I travel as cheaply as I can, as cheaply as possible, or I don't travel at all. And not traveling was never an option. So I identify with that very, and so like that meant
Right.
I didn't the things that I don't buy because I'm thinking, do you know where I can go for that money? You know?
Right. Yes. Yes.
And
And it's true. And it's true.
yes, yes. And so even even without a lot of people around you who were like, "Oh yeah, girl, go do it." You and your kids, y'all traveled all over the world. Um Now your kids are grown. They're living their own lives. And you are kind of you're a digital nomad. Would you call yourself that?
Uh-huh. I am. I work virtually for
Okay.
my company. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like and what that's like for you, a Black woman in midlife. Because again, just like backpacking was always something until I started traveling and until I moved abroad and got into circles where I saw other people who look like me doing these things. Digital nomading for a long time was something I associated with white folks. I think
Yes.
even
Yes.
now, it's still not seen as something that we do.
No, it's not.
So,
And the
like, how did
infrastructure,
you go?
go
What'd
ahead.
you say?
No, go ahead. And I was going to say, and the infrastructure for digital nomads is still predominantly white.
So, how did you go from mom of two, traveling with her kids, to digital nomad?
So, I mean, it's it wasn't anything major. So when COVID hit, so I work for a behavioral health agency. We provide clinical counseling services to children within the school setting and the home and the community. And I've been with the company 19 years and going on my 20th. And when COVID hit, telehealth came about, right? Because there was really no telehealth prior to COVID. And so we went virtual for 100% of what we did for like 2 years, a little more than 2 years. And in 2022, I realized that we weren't moving out of that digital, that virtual component. I thought that we would move back into going back into the homes, back in the community 100%. And when I got wind that that may not happen for another 2 years, I asked. I said, hey, anybody that's worked with me for the last 19 years, they know that I have to travel, I must travel, I need to travel, I will travel, right? And so everybody knows that my whole goal for probably the last 10, 12 years, I've talked about traveling full time. This was pre-travel influences. This was pre-travel blogs when the idea of how can I travel full time was brewing in my brain, right? This was all pre all of that. And so anybody that talked to me, knew of me, knew that that's what I wanted to do. So when the opportunity presented itself, I asked my company, I said, I want to work 100% virtually. Can I? They said, absolutely. Go have fun. Get out. And that was it.
Awesome.
I was blessed. I was blessed
Easy
because
as
they knew it
that.
was something that I wanted to do. And the thing about it is that my job is one, because the title is not program management, but it's basically program management. We have a program, we have grants, we have this, make sure pieces are all in where they need to be. You know, I'm that buffer between the agency and all the other people, the schools, the principals, the social workers, you know, the district and all of that. And they even went as trained to be my legs on the ground, because I would say probably 80% is now virtual and 20% is face-to-face. So when that came about, they said, well, you'll train this person to be the school-based liaison as well. And when it's those things that are face-to-face, she'll go in and do the face-to-face. They went as far as that. So
Oh,
I
wow.
was just blessed. Right. Well, first of all, I work for a Black-owned company, a Black husband and wife, and we've been family for the 19 years. So that has a lot to do with it. I don't work for a big white corporation, you know, and so they had the latitude to be able to do that. And I'm damn good at my job, so I'm a value, right? And so it was a no-brainer. It was doable, and I was a valued employee, and so it just worked.
Okay.
And so
Now,
I left February 2022.
okay. So, something else that I often hear, this was not a struggle of mine because my kids were grown, and I was like, it doesn't matter if I live down the street in another state or in another country. Like, to me, it's all the same.
Right.
But there are folks who,
Correct.
that's one of the things that gives them trepidation, being so far away
Correct.
from their children.
Ah! Okay. Okay.
So was that, when you were thinking about like how can you go and travel full time, was that something you considered?
No, not at all. It was something that I wanted to do. The goal actually was to do it. So the goal, first of all, the kids have known I wanted to do this since they were little. Like, they've known this. And so originally the goal was when they graduated from college, right? The goal was when they graduated from college, I'm going to give it 1 year after that, and I am going to go travel full time, right? I have been saving up money, and my thing was, if I got $12,000 saved, I'm gone, because I can make that $12,000 last a year. That's how adamant I was, right? So I did everything I could to work. I got the money. I was ready. And then one of my kids did not graduate. They're twins. One didn't graduate in 2017. So when she didn't graduate in 2017 and she was having some academic struggles, I couldn't in good conscience leave her, right? Because, you always have a needier child, or a child that, needs you more in a supportive role than another. So my son was more of, independent, kind of doing his thing, and my daughter needed my assistance. So she didn't graduate. She ended up graduating in 2020. So it put a 3-year monkey wrench into my thing. And so when she graduated in 2020, that April, when COVID hit, I had already asked for a 6-month leave. I had asked for a 6-month leave to travel full time, with the goal of, let me build my blog. Let me see if I can monetize. Let me do that in that 6 months. I got enough money to last me 6 months. And if I get things rolling and I could replace half my monthly income, I could do this. And so that was the plan. And then COVID hit. So I did not leave that April. I was ready. I had my ticket, the whole nine. I was ready to go. So that didn't happen.
Oh, wow.
That didn't happen. That didn't happen that April 2020. And she graduated under COVID. She graduated in January, December, the fall semester. And we were ready. I got her settled. She got an apartment, moved her in down in Florida. And at that point, I felt like, I'm good. You got this. You good. You got your apartment with your roommates. You ready. You got you a job. You're good. And then COVID hit.
But I always say, and not that I invented the saying, but the universe tends to unfold as it should. Because, and I'm thinking about what your situation is now, where you can work 100% remotely. So it's not this, again, outsider looking in, you don't have the pressure of, I got to figure out a way to replace my income, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Now you can just travel indefinitely. So,
And yes, and so it did work out better. It did work out better because I hate this social media thing. I struggle with making videos.
Girl.
I just thought, let me tell you something. People who do this social media thing, I give them all the pride. I got my tripod, I got my gimbal. I'm good, because my biggest argument was always, I didn't have enough content. Taking a trip once a year didn't give me enough content, right? That was my biggest excuse for years, right? And then when I left in February, I don't think people realize that I did 17 countries in 2022, right? 17, 18
I
countries.
didn't.
Because I probably posted maybe 4, maybe 5 countries, which is a damn shame, right? It is, because my goal was to really put 100% into it and really build it up now that I'm on the ground and I can get content on a regular basis. And it's like, I get in a country, I've been places where I'm just like, I was in Egypt, went to this fabulous pyramid that most people don't go to, and was just enamored by it, walked around the whole bit, got back in the car and was like, oh shit, I didn't even take one picture. Like, what the heck? Right? So I can't find my rhythm with the whole content creation.
You are not alone.
It's a struggle.
You are not alone in that, because I tell people all the time, I am a failed travel blogger, because I thought that that's what I was going to do. But something I learned about myself fairly early on is, when I travel, I want that to be for me. Like, I don't want it hanging over my head. Oh, you need to get this shot, this shot, this shot. You need to get so many minutes of footage of this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, girl, how you gonna make money being a travel blogger if you don't want people to put demands on your time when you travel? Okay.
Right. Right.
Then you add to that the game you have to play with the algorithm in order
Right.
to get engagement and all that. And I don't care enough, which is why I post very sporadically. And I was like, okay, look, this is not meant, this is not how I still am picky girl travels the world. Travel is important to me. It's going to be part of whatever I share. But doing that as my job, no, that did not work
Yeah.
out like I thought it was.
It's a hard one, but ultimately, I want to work for myself. So it's being able to find that thing that can sustain what I love, which is traveling, and provide me the financial means to do it, right? I don't want to be working for the man forever. I'm 57, and it's like, no, I don't. And so it's like I have to figure out the lesser of two evils. So I was supposed to work full time and then say trying to create content and do all these things full time. That just wasn't happening. And so I was supposed to drop to part time in August, but they needed me to stay on because the person I was training wasn't there yet. And then January came around, and I was supposed to drop to part-time come January, and I was asked to stay through March full-time. So I think I'm going to see the school semester out. I like the money. Don't get me wrong. That's what's sustaining me to keep this daggone job, is being able to have that monthly income coming in is kind of nice when you're traveling to developing nations and it may not be as expensive. So, my goal is to drop to part-time so that I can focus a little bit more on doing that. I really want to encourage other people to travel, especially women in midlife, right? Like, tomorrow's not promised, and I know friends that have never traveled internationally. I have friends that have never been on a plane and they want to, right? Like, my thing is, no regrets, try and leave this planet with no regrets. I don't care if you just take one trip, take baby steps. And so I really want women my age who've always wanted to travel. That's the difference. People who've always wanted to. I'm not trying to convince somebody who's never traveled to travel, right? Because that's just a hard sell, especially our age. We stubborn. We want to, we set in our ways. So trying to get us to change our mind at this point in our age is not going to happen. But never had the opportunity because they were, graduating from college, working their careers, raising their families. And the idea during our generation, when we were doing those things, this idea of travel and digital nomad and this freedom and seeing the world, there wasn't the bells and whistles it is now. And so for some, they think it's too late. And I just kind of I know I have a voice where I know I want to share and just kind of be that example of, you can do this, right? You can do this at every price point that you could possibly think of, right? Everything comes down to, what are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? And I just have to figure out this social media thing.
And no, you said right there, no regrets. That is, for me, that I came to that place about the time that I turned 40. I looked around and was like, is this the life that I want to live? Life is short. If I died tomorrow, would I want to look back and this had been the pinnacle? Would I have accomplished the things I want to accomplish? And the answer was a resounding no. And so I had a conversation with myself and was like, girl, you need to get it together then. Like, what are you waiting on to have the life that you want? And that's when I started moving things. So no, we on this channel, on this show, we are very much, there is no such thing as it's too late. I am too
Right.
old. I blew my life up at 39, 40. And the other side of it has surpassed anything I could have imagined. And,
Right.
if I died tomorrow, I can say I did the things. I was doing the things. There are
Exactly.
no regrets here. And I too, I want that for Black women. I don't want the I shoulda, I woulda, I coulda. I don't want that. I want them to say, I did it. I've been there. I had that, whatever that is.
I don't know whether it's permission. I don't know tools and information to know that they can do it, right? I think it's a combination of things. I think it's fear. But I truly think that most people think that travel, international travel, is cost prohibitive. And it's just, and it's all subjective, right? Because obviously, if I'm making $12,000 a year, it could be cost prohibitive, right? But I'm talking about the average working class, middle class person making 40, 50, $60,000. They can still travel. And I think that they think that they can't. And it's probably because of social media. It's all
You know what?
twisted up. People laying up in these luxury big blowing dresses in Greece and talking about how much what hotel they're staying in. And we're going to go Google it and find out it was $400 a night, right? And I think that that's turned people off to the idea that they can afford that too.
Because what those people don't mention enough is they're staying at the place that costs $400 a night, but they're not paying for it. That's a sponsored trip, or, a commercial partnership, or something like that. Or they got a day pass, went in, took their pictures, correct, and they left. And that's correct. One of the things I appreciate about the content you do post is there's several of your posts I have saved about like how to visit this country for $500, that it's very right. authentic and transparent, and shows that if traveling is what you want to do, it can be done. You do not have to have excessive amounts of money to still be able to go and experience new places and experience different cultures.
Right. And it's not to knock those people that, that are staying in those $800 a night hotels. Me and my kids talk about this all the time. Like, if I did come into money, I still don't think I would be comfortable staying in an $800 a night hotel. That's just me, right? That's just me. I don't know what it is about me. That's just me. But it's this idea that you have to, back in the days we used to say, oh, you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? And so it's watching this and thinking they have to keep up with the Joneses. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I did a video of where I was staying, right? And it was like a $20 a night hotel. It had a nice big king size bed, a little desk, teapot, and it was clean, right? And she was like, girl, I could never stay there. And she was like, why? She was like, them sheets look like they rough, right? And so I said to her some comment, and she was like, no, I heard that this hotel over here has 1,600 thread count sheets or 2,000. And I was like, what you sleeping on? Because I was with you at Target when you bought those sheets on sale, and feel that you should be staying in a place that 1,600 thread count sheets. I don't get it. I know a vacation is supposed to be a vacation.
If that's what you want, but
I don't get it.
Going to cost you. If that is what you want, because there are people, I know people like this who, for them, travel has to be luxurious or not at all. And a lot of times it's right. not at all. And for right. me, it was way more important that I go. And, I laugh about it now. I stopped staying in hostels because of the pandemic. I'm maybe at the point now where I can go back to that, but it's,
You're a germaphobe?
Not a germaphobe. It's just like the number of people, like I don't know how those people live their lives. And one thing the pandemic showed me is everybody don't live their life the way I do. So being in a 20 bunk room with strangers who don't know how to wash their hands, like I couldn't do that. But like, I think about when I was in New Zealand and I was in that bunk room with 24 bunks, but I wanted to be in New Zealand. And right. if that's what it took for me to be there, that's what I did. you know? So, and everybody is different. But if you're listening to this and you're one of the people that you want to travel so bad and you think it's not possible, because we're not talking to the folks who need the 1,600 thread count sheets. That's not who we're talking to. Maybe there's somebody else who's talking to you, but that's not who we're talking to. We're talking to the women who you want to travel, but you can't figure out how to make it work. So here's a thing. Okay, somebody might be listening to this and they're wondering, well, what are some of these places where my money can go further? Where are some of the places where you have been able to stretch your dollar the furthest or have, like a great trip?
I think time dictates that to some extent, right? Whether you're going to be in a country for 7 days or if you're going to be in a country for 30 days, it makes a difference, right? I've seen people go to Morocco for a week and spend $5,000, right? Between their tours and their hotel and their food and activities and all those different things, right? But you can stay in Morocco for a month and rent a place for $400 a month, and that's mid-level. That's not even lower level, right? That's mid-level, right? That's in a middle class neighborhood, 2-bedroom, nice big balcony, the whole nine, right? Because I could have gone cheaper, right? Got me, a basic studio apartment in maybe not a middle class and a working class neighborhood and paid 200, right? But I gotta have a little, right? Morocco's a place. I said Guatemala is an absolutely breathtaking country. Puerto Rico has gotten more expensive now, so I wouldn't add Puerto Rico on there. I'm going to throw this country out there. Most people probably never even heard of it, but Tbilisi, Georgia, the country of Georgia. When I say that's a country that I will return to every single year, Tbilisi, Georgia. And it is dirt cheap in Tbilisi, Georgia. And one of the most breathtaking, beautiful, and if you are a wine person, you will never want to leave Tbilisi. Okay. So that's 4 that I can think of off the top of my head. And of course, you add Southeast Asia, Vietnam.
So yes. Right there, that's anybody who's looking to get started. Those are great places. I'm not going to ask you how many countries you've been to. I will ask, is there a favorite destination?
I don't know. Morocco has gotten in my soul, under my skin, like to the point where I'm talking about, I would buy an apartment in Morocco. Like,
really?
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yes. Morocco. Yeah. And will I say it's my favorite for specific reasons. The people that I've connected with there, the culture, the food, right? Is it visually my favorite country? No, that would have to be Zanzibar in outside of Tanzania. It would have to be Zanzibar as far as breathtaking beauty, culture, food, the whole bit. But I did Morocco 3 separate months in 2022. I just kept on going back. It became when I needed to decompress and I just needed to be at home. I went back to Morocco. So I found myself in Morocco 3 separate months. So yeah, it's just something about Morocco that I just absolutely adore.
Okay, so you've been nomading for more than a year. Have you had any challenges that you didn't expect?
Yes, girl. I did not put as much thought. I went into this very naively thinking that I'm going to have all these great adventures and then I'm going to pull out my computer and I'm going to work and everything is going to be smooth. I'm going to get all this content. I'm going to be working on my blog. I'm going to start a podcast, just all of these ideas of what I was going to do. And the reality hit in that first country that there was a 7-hour time difference. I have to say that difference, because in theory, you think that you're going to do X, Y, and Z, but in practicality, it does never happen like that if it's a 7-hour time difference. So that has to probably be the biggest challenge that I've had, is really adjusting to be able to be productive outside of my 9-to-5 job, to build what I want to build. I just haven't been on any productivity momentum because my body is just like, girl, did I not tell you to go to sleep? Like, it's just that time thing is, I don't think people really realize that, when you're day to day, Monday through Friday, every week, it's been a challenge. I'm surprised that was the biggest challenge that I've had. And it is. Like, India right now, it's a 10.5-hour time difference from the US. 10.5 hours.
So if you're supposed to be working for your job at, let's say, 10 a.m. Eastern, what time is that in India?
8:30 p.m. So when I finish up, because I'll take calls and check emails and stuff till 6 p.m. normally, right? If you work a 9-to-5 job, in order for me not to be backed up the next day, I need to finish this stuff out. So maybe 6 p.m. Workers may call me up until 7 p.m. So when I was 5-hour difference, workers knew that they can call me up till 7 p.m. And then I'm going to put my do not disturb sign on. But honey, 5:01, I'm putting do not disturb, because that's 4:30 in the morning. It's 4:30 in the morning for me. I cannot tell you how many days I met the sun coming up and I'm sitting at my computer. And so, yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
not.
You're right. You're right. I don't think there's
easy.
enough conversation about that, especially like when people are choosing destinations, to put some thought into, okay, but what time, how does the time zone, how is that going to impact you? I have seen some
Right.
digital nomads who are like, I am only looking for locations in this time zone, because they're like, I can't do it.
Correct. Because like Southeast Asia is 12 hours. So Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, it's a 12-hour difference. So yeah, you do have to take that into consideration. And I didn't, I had been in countries where the time zone was different, but I didn't think of the day-to-day, Monday through Friday, of having to really adapt to that. And realizing that, like in India, by the time I lay down at 4:30, my body goes to sleep at 5:30. I sleep until noon. So how much running around and exploring am I going to do after waking up at 1 o'clock, when I need to be back at my Wi-Fi by 7 p.m. So I have 5 hours to what? Go run around and see everything. And I'm going to be dog tired and got to be up until 4 a.m. Girl, please. Not happening.
I've not been to India, but I would imagine it is not a place where you can do things quickly. So
you cannot, girl, you cannot at all. You can't go 5 blocks quickly. No, you can't. So I think that has probably been my biggest struggle. Everything else has been as I expected. That has been my biggest struggle. And I'm really trying to figure out how to better manage it.
So if somebody watching this, listening to this, they are interested in following your adventures, where is the best place for them to do that?
Girl, the only thing I got going, and don't have that going 100% is Instagram. I'm going to stop putting out what I'm going to do because, don't talk about it, be about it. My goal was to have a website, and I have a website that I just haven't launched. Like, it's built out the whole bit, and because it's another job. It's another
I know it is, which is why I got shamed the other week. I did a YouTube live. I run a investing challenge every few months. And there
Okay.
was no, somebody was like, well, okay, so if somebody wants to get on the wait list, can they do that from your website? And I was like, no, because I hadn't updated the website in a year or two. So like I know it's a whole nother job. Um, something
It
that
is.
helped me, something that helped me is done is better than perfect. And I have had to use that philosophy when I find myself like, like, oh, it's not
Yes.
ready
And I
yet.
and I and I
Done is better.
I know, and I keep saying that to myself, but it's just like, and I would say the other challenge, and this has nothing to do with being a digital nomad, but trying to build and, in this social media realm is the technology of it, learning how to put them damn blocks that you can point to and they pop up, and just it's that piece that has been the
Yes.
challenge to me. That has been, I know, took courses, but nobody wants to teach you. I'm a hands-on person. I'm a visual and hands-on person. So I haven't found a course yet where they're gonna sit there and they're gonna walk us through. So this is how we do this. All right, let's go. And it's just constantly changing and moving. And girl, I think the last time I posted a reel on my feed, I want to say October, which makes no damn sense. I want to say October, no, maybe November. I think maybe November, because my daughter
Well,
came to Morocco to see me. And it's
luck
now February. And you know how many countries I've been to? You know how much content that I have, how many videos, and I just I need to take that philosophy. Done is better than perfect, because I'm a perfectionist and I need it to be perfect and I want it to look perfect and I want the real to do, and I'm overthinking it. And I don't know how. I struggle with getting out of my own damn way. I really
I
do.
hear you. I hear you. Luckily for us, Lisa does post to her stories. So if you follow her on Instagram at Adventurous Midlifer, you can at least know. Like I thought you were going to be in India for this interview based off of what I saw in your story. So, um, you can definitely follow her, get some inspiration, see what is possible. Um, for us, midlife Black women.
Absolutely.
I don't think people pay enough attention to us and reminding us that there's still a lot possible. Like we're not done, you know?
Right. We're not our parents' midlife.
No.
You know, I'm not my grandmother's midlife. I remember my grandmother in her 50s, and I just recall her being so old, right? And it's just a different generation. Um, but the possibilities are there, right? Like, see the world, take baby steps, promise yourself that you're going to take one trip. I started building momentum when I made a promise to myself after my 40th birthday that I was going to wake up in a different country every year on my birthday. And I did, and I stuck with it. Every year on my birthday, April 8th, I woke up in a different country. That was the only time that I had to travel. It was spring break for the kids. They went to dad. So take baby steps and plan something for you, even if it's just once a year. There's so much of this world to be seen, and it changes you for the better. So I encourage everybody to travel, young, old.
So I think you can see why it made sense for us to talk to Lisa. She has carved out a life for herself that at 54 years old is very different, I think, from most of the other women, other Black women that same age. If you're looking to kind of buck the system, I think I want you to take away from Lisa's story that there are no, like dreams don't expire. We don't believe in that around here. There is no such thing as I am too old. If there is something you want to do, it can be done. You know, find the women who are out there doing the thing. So if you are a mid 50 something, 60 something Black woman, and you're like, oh, I'd love to see some other folks who are doing the same thing, go follow Lisa on Instagram. Whatever the thing is that you're thinking about doing, find those people. I know it has been a while since we have had a new podcast episode. Y'all, life has been insanely busy since about, I don't know, last 4 or 5 months. I just spent 2 weeks helping a friend clean out their storage unit. So there was no podcast editing, podcast recording. It was just 12 hours a day cleaning and sorting and selling and all of that. Now that I'm kind of back a little bit more in the groove, hopefully you will get podcast episodes with a little bit more regularity. Um, but I'm not gonna, like, don't hold me to that. There's a lot going on in life right now. I am getting ready to prepare to host my first retreat, Reclaim the Retreat. This background reminds me a lot of the retreat location in El Salvador. So I might not be around as much. Again, I'm sorry, but thank y'all for having my back and supporting me. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video. That's very helpful in helping other women find the podcast. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, go ahead and do that. If you are listening to this on a podcatcher like Apple Podcast, I think it's called. I don't know, y'all. I'm not an Apple person, but like, leave us a review. Do those things to help support the podcast, and I will try to work harder about getting you new episodes. Okay, till next time.